How to Get Good at Art, Part 1. Common Elements of Design. Here are some common terms that we use in all fields of art to be able to communicate with one another and also to think about these concepts as discrete elements. You can't really do something without having a name for it first. So let's give some names. Form. It's any three-dimensional object, and that means it has height, width, and depth, or at least appears to. We're mostly working in 2 dimensions in Photoshop, right? So all of our three-dimensional seeming objects are actually represented to us and to the viewer as 2-dimensional. There are 2 types, organic and geometric. Organic is natural, like humans, plants, and geometric would be man-made. Things that we made, like computers, digital watches. Shape is what form is made from. It's the discrete parts of a form, or not necessarily so discrete. Like, the front and the side, those could be 2 different shapes, depending on how you look at it. But essentially, a shape stands out from the space next to it. So it is discrete in that way that it is kind of, it needs to not blend into whatever is next to it. It needs to have some kind of delineation. Line is one of the ways we get these delineations. It can be solid, broken, or implied. And obviously, it can be straight or curved. This defines the boundaries of shapes. And by implied, a lot of times a line is there, but it's not like we didn't, with a pencil or a pen, draw a line. It's actually could be a subtle change in hue from one form to another, or one shape to another. And that creates a line. Even if there's no actual line there. The line is there if it is an edge. Texture. Especially with computer graphics, adding some texture can go a long way to adding interest. Because surfaces in the real world are never completely flat. So adding some texture can help imply how a surface feels like. Is it smooth? Is it rough? Is it icy? Is it wet? You can do clean and sterile design on a computer, so adding texture can help humanize your work. And of course, a little can go a long way. You don't have to have texture on every shape in your design, but if a few of them do, it adds more interest, and it's probably going to make your work stand out from somebody else's that isn't applying texture. Color. It's the one thing we humans like the most. It's basically made out of 3 different elements. Hue, which is what we would think of as the type of color something is. Red, green, blue, etc. Saturation is how much of that color. So how red is something and how blue is something. And then brightness is how light or dark is it. Different colors have different connotations in other cultures, so keep this in mind when you're designing. Color is not, on its own, it doesn't give meaning that is universal. For instance, white could imply purity in one culture, but death in another. So make sure that you know your audience whenever you're using color, because it may mean something to you, and you might think that meaning is universal and everyone accepts it as this, but that ain't necessarily so. Space. The implied area around, above, below, or behind a form is what space is. So at this, the launching of the space shuttle, Atlantis, you can see that the shuttle is on top of 2 booster rockets. And because it is overlapping, we can tell, okay, the shuttle is actually closer to the camera than the booster rockets. Also, space is created by shadows, shading, and sizing. Emphasis focal point. This is where your eye naturally goes in the design. And as a designer, we are always manipulating where people's eye should be focused on. So keeping the emphasis or focal point, knowing what that might be, you can manipulate that to guide the viewer's eye to elements of the design that you want people to pay attention to.